Welcome to Gospel and Hunt. I'm Jean-Pierre Ruth for Information Week, and on this episode, we'll be discussing the recent federal reauthorization of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And on this episode, I'm joined by Richard Searle, the Chief AI Officer for Fortinix, and Coben Zweifel-Keegan, Managing Director of the Washington office of IAPP. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here.
Coben, could you give our audience a quick little bit of background of your role at IAPP and just a little perspective, if you will, on what this recent reauthorization means? Just top of mind thoughts about the act.
Sure. Yeah. So I am, as you said, the managing director of our DC office. I'm a privacy lawyer, so I'm here to keep track of the evolving policy conversation around privacy and increasingly AI issues as well. IAPP is the International Association of Privacy Professionals. We're a nonprofit global professional association. So we represent the people who do the work of privacy within organizations around the world. And we're policy neutral, so we don't engage in the policy conversation. We don't try to change minds exactly, except on the issue of the need for people to do this work in privacy. And most privacy professionals are more concerned with commercial privacy issues, consumer privacy issues, but a lot of companies are impacted by government authorities like FISA, particularly, of course, the kind of communications companies at issue. But this is always an issue that is very important for privacy professionals and others to keep track of within organizations, because even if it doesn't directly impact them, it can have secondary implications. And so, this is overall, this is sort of yet another cycle of reauthorization. We kind of end up recycling some of the same debates in Washington every time we go through the cycle of needing to reauthorize the FISA authorities, and this time, despite a lot of engagement from many different stakeholders, we mostly ended up with kind of the same statute in front of us. I am happy to go into more of kind of what some of the recommendations have been from the government watchdog groups, and those honestly very much track a lot with what industry and civil society, some of the common complaints, they really do. There's a lot of commonality between the recommendations that different stakeholders have had in this area. But for now, we're still in the same regime that we've had before when it comes to the authorities here.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you for that. Richard, can you tell the audience just a little bit about yourself and just, again, your top of mind thoughts about what this means for your role and from the tech company perspective?
Yeah, for sure. So my role at Fortinix is now Chief AI Officer, and we're a data-first multi-cloud security company based in Santa Clara. So we've pioneered the use of an important privacy-enhancing technology called confidential computing. And my role is to essentially establish the framework for the company in terms of how we ourselves use AI, perhaps in our products, and then how we assist our customers with preserving security and privacy of their AI systems. And to that end, I'm the principal investigator for Fortinix at the NIST AI Safety Institute Consortium, which is an important industry collaboration to try and establish how to manage the various risks associated with AI adoption. And in the context of what we're talking about today, our role is to essentially understand, how legislation impacts the transfer of digital information. I think we'll probably talk about how FISA has evolved since its original inception, and how privacy-enhancing technology needs to be applied within the framework of compliance established by FISA, and the implications for data communications providers in the broad sense who are going to be subject to its enforcement. So that's my role within Fortinix, and we take a very broad view of the data privacy and compliance issues that our customers are facing, because most of them are extraterritorial. They don't just operate in one jurisdiction. It's a global economy, global legislative frameworks, and of course increasing amounts of regulation coming not only to complement the data privacy and data protection regulations that are already established, but also new regulations around AI that overlap. So helping customers understand that is also an important function of what I'll be doing in future.
Great. Thank you much for that. So let's talk a little bit of background as kind of level set with FISA or FISA or whatever way we want to say it. When it was first introduced, 1978, I believe, when it first came into existence. At that time, what was telecommunications was largely the phone company, a single phone company for the most part. And a lot has changed since then in terms of the way we communicate, what this act really connects to and affects. Out of you, where are we now in terms of the types of outlets, resources that may find themselves under, that need to comply with this, and then, what ways what does that mean for maybe on the personal, individual privacy side of things, but then also for the companies that then find themselves needing to then find ways to, adhere to this. What are we looking at these days? And if you can just talk about like how it's really evolved from like those inception days, if you will.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you want to take that, Coven, on the?
Either way, if you want to start, I can fill in, or else I can go first. I don't know.
All right, I'll jump in. So
Okay.
obviously, as you mentioned, Jean-Pierre, the FISA regulations go right back to 1978, when the world was a very different place, and it was primarily aimed at telecommunications providers, effectively the carrier networks as we think of them today, in terms of transmission of information between people and the interception of those communications in order to understand whether there are any potential risks that law enforcement should investigate. Clearly, things have changed, not only in terms of the landscape of information that FISA addresses, but also the context within which FISA can be applied. So if we deal with the first issue, we're now in a digital world. We transfer data across data networks that can include all kinds of personally identifiable information, sensitive commercial information. And it's not just within the domain of the carrier networks that information is transferred. We use different communication media, and also companies that are involved in the distribution of information for services that we use are also subject to those regulations in the same way as the infrastructures that they might be using, including, of course, things like cloud infrastructure. And then, of course, a significant transition in the FISA regulations happened in 2008 when the contentious Section 702 was introduced, which effectively enables warrantless search of data. And I think that's the focus of the majority of the privacy concerns. And maybe, Coben, you want to pick up on that from that point, I think.
Sure. Yeah, that's a perfect segue for me, because yeah, exactly as you said, that's sort of the subject of this reauthorization fight, and the primary subject of most of the scholarship and thinking and advocacy around FISA overall has been Section 702 since 2008 when it was first passed. It very much was a response to 9/11 and a response to the investigations into intelligence failures, the failure to stop the attacks on 9/11, which were largely blamed on a lack of coordination and intelligence sharing within different all of our many alphabet soup of intelligence agencies in the United States. So this provides for a mechanism to collect information about non-U.S. individuals outside of the United States for foreign intelligence purposes. It's an interception of certain communications of those targets, But one of the pieces of that that leads to controversy is that because those individuals are often engaged in communicating with individuals in the United States, there are Americans who enjoy certain constitutional rights that are whose communications might be caught up in that surveillance. There are the structure of 702 has evolved and has been set up in a way to provide a number of checks and balances and accountability around how the government is allowed to then query certain the data that has been collected under these authorities, and that's where again a lot of the debate ends up happening. I think it's worth mentioning briefly, though, this conversation about how who needs to comply, how the entities that need to comply have shifted. There are some changes to that under this recent reauthorization, likely in response to a FISA court ruling that recently that had decided that data centers are not necessarily don't need to comply with some of these authorities, and so there has been a bit of a broadening, which the House amendments that created this described as trying to modernize that act to continue to keep pace with existing technologies and the realities of where this type of data is held. But it does seem that under this reauthorization, there will be additional types of entities that do need to comply with orders to collect this information, whom may not have needed to comply in the last iteration of this.
Gotcha. And my understanding that this latest reauthorization, it's for a 2-year term versus the 5 years that it has been in the past.
Yes, I think that's correct.
Yeah, my understanding. I mean, there are various political reasons behind that, but do you think that there will be, when it comes up again, that there will be a revisitation of some of the more contentious things that were, maybe sought to try to, be worked out this time around, that there'll be a revival of those conversations?
Yeah, I think often we hear a lot of the same conversations each time reauthorization happens, and they get more mature. We learn more about how it's been used, potential misuses. We have really this time we have the most kind of, I think the report from last year, last fall, the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, which is a government watchdog group that is set up with the explicit reason to check up on these types of authorities. They released a report that is probably the most kind of all in one place analysis of both the good things and the bad things about the existing structure. And they offer some 19 recommendations for adjustments here, which have not yet been taken into consideration, but I think they could, there were bills this time that would have made those adjustments, and I think those recommendations won't necessarily fade. It is probably worth noting that this time the PCLOB in their report were divided along party lines in the recommendations that they were making. It was a 3-2 report. All of them agree that this authority should exist, that we should have Section 702 of FISA, but they disagree on the types of tweaks that should be made. And so in a different administration, or depending on how the next election goes, there might be different tweaks that are more prominent than others, but we saw that in this environment, no one could agree on what tweaks were actually worth pursuing, and so we ended up with what's mostly a full reauthorization.